Part 1. The Descent. The sun was a merciless tyrant above the Utah desert, perched in a throne of cloudless blue. Waves of heat shimmered over cracked sandstone, and the air felt brittle, as though it might shatter from a single sound. It was the kind of heat that made the horizon bend, the kind that burned into your skull and whispered secrets only the mad would understand. Eli Voss stood at the edge of a world forgotten. Before him lay a jagged canyon, a scar ripped through the desert by ancient waters and older winds. It wasn't on any modern map. Eli had found it in a faded field journal from 1897, tucked away in a box at a dusty university archive. The journal's author, a forgotten geologist named A. Dunbridge, had scribbled something curious. The lost breath of the earth, a place where echoes do not belong to time. Most would have dismissed it. Eli had packed his bag. He was not a tourist or thrill seeker. He was a chronic seeker of the hidden and the unspoken, the kinds of places that chewed up old legends and buried new ones. For him, this journey wasn't about adventure. It was about discovery, solitude, and something he hadn't yet named. He stood in worn boots, dust-streaked cargo pants, and a sun-faded shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal lean, weathered arms. His pack was heavy but familiar. Water, protein bars, drone already dead, journal, first aid kit, flare gun, climbing gear, and one treasured item, a brass compass his father had given him at 18. It had seen more of the world than most people ever would. He looked down into the crevice, narrow, shadowed, uninviting. The canyon walls looked like rusted blades. Something about the silence made his skin crawl. No birds, no wind, just heat and the occasional whisper of shifting dust. Eli unrolled a length of climbing rope and secured it to a half-buried anchor point in the rock. He double-checked the knots, slid into his harness, and tested the tension with a few careful jerks. It held. The descent would be tight, barely a meter across at some points, but he'd done tighter, more dangerous. He took a breath, stepped backward over the ledge, and dropped into the silence. At 10 meters down, the temperature changed. The sunlight became thinner, filtered and broken by the walls. The wind couldn't reach this far, and the air felt stale, like the breath of something long dead. Eli paused on a small outcropping and scanned the stone. That's when he saw them. Etchings. Ancient petroglyphs carved deep into the canyon wall, spirals, angular symbols, humanoid shapes with elongated limbs. There was something odd about them. They were neither ancestral Puebloan nor Fremont. They looked older, almost anatomical. A central spiral with ribs radiating outward. He traced one symbol with a gloved finger. It looked like lungs or wings or both. He took out his phone to photograph them. The screen glitched. Static lines flickered across the display before it went dark completely. Odd. He frowned, slipped it away, and continued downward. 20 meters. That's when it happened. A thin ledge beneath his right boot cracked. He shifted weight quickly, too quickly. His left foot slipped. The rope jerked. His glove tore against a sharp stone, and then there was no footing. The rock face became a blur. Eli fell. Part 2. The Fall. The world exploded in a moment of chaos. Air tore past Eli's ears like a furious beast, the canyon walls streaking by in a dizzying blur of reds and ochres. The sharp edges of rock sliced into his skin and clothes as he tumbled down the narrow chute. His heart slammed in his chest like a drum beaten by fate itself. 15 meters of freefall, then impact. The canyon floor erupted in a thunderous crash. Stones shattered around him, dust clouding the air. Pain blossomed instantly. A searing, white-hot blaze ripping through his left leg, pinning him beneath a slab of stone heavier than anything he'd ever lifted. The world spun into darkness. When consciousness returned, it was like waking in a tomb. Eli tasted copper and grit, blood thick in his mouth. His breath came in ragged gasps, throat burning dry. The heat above had vanished. The air was stale, damp with the chill of shadows. He was trapped. His left leg was caught beneath a jagged boulder, the weight crushing, immovable. Every movement sent bolts of fire stabbing through his calf and thigh. He tried to sit up, but a fresh wave of nausea and pain forced him back down. His hands fumbled blindly for his backpack. The emergency beacon, crushed, useless. The flare gun, jammed beneath the weight of rocks. His water still there, untouched. Eli's mind raced, flickering between panic and cold calculation. 5 days. 5 days alone in the canyon, with a broken leg, no signal, and limited water. He closed his eyes and forced a slow, steady breath. Conserve, survive. His fingers searched the cracked stone floor, trying to find something, anything, to lever the rock or ease the pressure. Nothing. The boulder wouldn't budge. Eli's leg throbbed with a slow, cruel rhythm. Swelling bloomed beneath the skin, discoloring like bruises spreading poison. The crushing weight numbed his toes. But the pain was only part of the fight. The canyon was alive. Faint sounds echoed off the walls, the soft drip of water from unseen crevice, the distant rustle of wind against stone, and beneath it all something deeper, a low, resonant hum, as if the earth itself was breathing. He opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling of rock above. Somewhere out there the sun would set, and darkness would swallow the canyon whole. He was utterly alone. The first night stretched on endlessly. The cold crept through the rock, clawing at his skin. His lips cracked, dry as old parchment. He wrapped his arms around himself, trying to stay warm, but the chill was relentless. The silence was worse, broken only by the soft crackling of his own breath and the steady thump of his heart. Sleep came in broken shards, filled with dreams of running free across wide-open spaces, of cool streams and open skies. But each time he awoke, the pain was sharper. His leg felt like it was on fire, every nerve screaming in protest. His supplies were meager, a half-liter of water, 2 protein bars, the flare gun with 1 shot, and a small, battered knife. He could only wait and hope. Part 3. Day 1. Denial. Morning light spilled into the narrow canyon like a flood of cold gold. Eli's eyes fluttered open, the harsh brightness slicing through the darkness that had wrapped him overnight. His body screamed in protest, every movement a sharp reminder of the boulder crushing his leg, the broken bone hidden beneath the swelling flesh. But his mind refused to believe it. This can't be real. He reached toward the rock, testing its weight with a trembling hand. No shift. The stone was a wall, unmoving and merciless. His breath hitched, but he swallowed down the rising panic. No one knew where he was. His emergency beacon, the one fragile lifeline, was crushed beyond repair. The drone he'd sent ahead was dead. He was alone. And yet, a stubborn voice inside whispered, "This isn't happening. It can't be happening." Eli's mind raced, chasing 1,000 what-ifs and maybes. What if someone comes looking? What if he can dig himself free? What if the pain dulls? What if it's just a bad dream? Denial. He repeated the word like a mantra, wrapping it around himself like armor. He reached into his pack with slow, deliberate movements, every ounce of energy precious. Water, protein bars, the flare gun with a single shot. He sipped carefully, conserving every drop. The desert air was already heating, promising a brutal day ahead, but Eli's mind focused only on pushing the truth away. This is temporary. Tomorrow will be better. Someone will come. But deep down, beneath the denial, a flicker of doubt sparked like dry tinder in a breeze. Maybe not. Part 4. Day 2. The sun rose mercilessly, beating down on the canyon walls like a relentless hammer. Eli's breath came shallow, his body aching in ways he hadn't imagined possible. The pain in his leg was no longer just a dull throb. It had sharpened into a cruel, biting fire that licked its way through every muscle, bone, and nerve. He clenched his jaw, sweat stinging his eyes as he fought to breathe through the agony. Every movement sent shocks through his trapped limb. He tried to shift the boulder, to wiggle free even a fraction, but the stone remained immovable, a cold and indifferent jailer. His throat was parched, lips cracked and bleeding. The half-liter of water in his pack was almost gone. Pain was no longer just physical. It seeped into his mind, clouding thoughts, dragging at the edges of his willpower. His vision blurred. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows lengthening into sinister shapes. He forced himself to open his journal, the one thing tethering him to sanity. He wrote in shaky script, "Pain is the enemy, but so is surrender. I am still here, still breathing, still fighting." His fingers trembled as he wrote, each word a battle. Eli thought about his family, his sister Lana, who had called just days ago. Would she ever know what had happened? Would anyone? The desert was silent but unforgiving. He felt the heat of the sun draining away the last reserves of his strength. And yet, through the fog of agony, a stubborn ember of determination burned. He was not done. Part 5, Day 3, Reflection. The dawn was pale, filtered through a thin veil of dust suspended in the air. Eli's body ached with every breath, but his mind began to clear, sharpened by exhaustion and desperate clarity. The pain was still there, a constant companion, but something else stirred inside him. Reflection. He closed his eyes and let his thoughts wander back through the years. Moments of joy and regret, triumph and failure. Faces flickered in his memory. His sister Lana's fierce smile, his father's steady hands, the friends he'd lost on other expeditions. He thought about the canyon itself, how it had beckoned him, a siren of ancient secrets. The petroglyphs, the echoing shadows, the mysteries hidden in its depths. Why had he been drawn here, alone, against better judgment? A pang of guilt gripped him. His stubbornness, his refusal to ask for help, had led him here, trapped, broken, isolated. But reflection was not defeat. It was fuel. He reached again for his journal, and with a slow, deliberate hand, he wrote, "I have chased the wild for years, always alone, always pushing forward. Maybe this is the price, but if I live, it will not be just for me. It will be for all the voices I carry inside me." His thoughts turned inward, mapping out possibilities. What could he do? How could he escape? The answers weren't clear yet, but the questions were. For the first time in days, he allowed himself a spark of hope. Part 6, Day 4. Madness. Day 4 dawned like a cruel trick. The sun, a merciless overseer, was already hammering the canyon walls with relentless heat before Eli even opened his eyes. His mouth was dry, cracked like parched earth, and his throat rasped with every breath. The pain in his leg had shifted, sharper now, raw, stabbing with every tiny pulse of his heart. It no longer felt like a part of him, but an alien thing, a tormentor dragging him deeper into despair. The hours crawled like insects across the rocks. Time, once a fluid river, had hardened into a frozen lake. Every minute was an eternity. His mind began to fray. The silence pressed in around him, thick and suffocating. The canyon, once a place of mystery and challenge, had turned into a cage, a labyrinth of shadows and echoes that taunted him with their endless repetitions. Voices came at the edges of his hearing, whispers that weren't really there. The wind moaned, carrying phantom voices, his own name, cries for help, laughter from a time long gone. Eli's eyelids fluttered, but sleep was a stranger. Nightmares lurked in every blink, falling endlessly, drowning in dust, being buried alive beneath the very rocks that held him prisoner. He clutched his journal, his only tether to sanity, and tried to write. Words blurred, letters smeared as his hands shook uncontrollably. The pen was a lifeline, but the sentences twisted into nonsense, mocking his efforts. "Don't let go," he whispered to himself, voice ragged. "Hold on." The flare gun sat useless in his pack, a single shot of hope that had gone unfired. The water was almost gone, just a few desperate sips left. He hadn't eaten since the first day, the protein bars long gone. His body was a shell, weakening with every breath. Hunger gnawed, a beast clawing at his insides. His thoughts spiraled. Would anyone find him? Had Lana called for help? Did anyone even know where to start searching in this vast wasteland? The loneliness was unbearable. He tried to focus on the sounds around him, the distant caw of a raven, the scrape of a rock against rock, but his senses betrayed him. The canyon seemed alive with eyes watching, shadows shifting just beyond sight. Madness was creeping in. He imagined himself climbing out, scaling the sheer walls with strength he no longer had. Imagined Lana's face when he returned, relief, love, anger, all mixed in a single glance. The hallucinations came then, subtle at first, a flicker of movement in the corner of his eye, a figure standing at the canyon's edge. "Eli," it whispered, "come home." He blinked. Nothing. His mind's grip on reality slipped further. A scream rose from deep within him, raw, guttural, filled with all the pain and fear he'd bottled up for days. But the canyon swallowed it whole. Tears burned his eyes, and he let them fall, wet tracks on dust-cracked skin. For a moment he didn't fight the madness. He let it wash over him, a wave of despair and rage and helplessness. But then, somewhere deep inside, something snapped. A spark, a flash of defiance. "No," he growled, "I'm not done yet." He forced himself to breathe deeply, counting slowly. 1, 3. His fingers curled around the journal. He wrote, shaky but determined, "Madness is a visitor. It will come and it will go, but I am still here. I am still fighting." The day wore on. The sun sank behind the canyon's rim, casting long shadows that seemed to pulse with his heartbeat. The night would bring cold again, pain again, but also a chance to rest, to gather strength to survive. Eli Voss, trapped and broken, was still alive. And as madness whispered its dark songs, he whispered back, louder, stronger, fiercer, "I will get out of here." Part 7th, Day 5, Resolve. The morning light crept into the canyon like a cautious visitor, soft and tentative. Eli's eyes fluttered open to the faint glow, the sharp sting of pain already gnawing at his senses. The night had been cold and long, the bitter chill sapping the last fragments of his strength, but something new flickered inside him, a fierce, burning resolve. Today, he would escape. It wasn't hope born from miracles or luck, but from the raw necessity of survival. The abyss he'd faced in his mind on Day 4 had retreated just enough to reveal a sliver of clarity, a stubborn will to live that refused to be crushed beneath the weight of rock and time. Eli flexed his fingers, numb and cracked, but still responsive. His breath was ragged, lungs burning as he forced his body to move, just slightly. The pain in his leg was relentless, but the fire inside his chest was fiercer. He sat up, leaning against the jagged wall, feeling the rough stone bite into his back. The boulder that had trapped him loomed overhead like a judgment carved in granite. For 5 days it had been a prison, and a silent tormentor. "Today," he whispered, voice hoarse but steady, "I'm getting out." The plan had to be careful. Impulsive struggle had landed him here. Now, every move must be deliberate, every ounce of energy rationed like precious water. First, he examined the stone that pinned his leg. It was massive, far too heavy to move with raw strength. But the canyon was full of smaller rocks and debris, fragments broken loose by time and his fall. He searched his pack with trembling hands, the knife, the flare gun, the first aid supplies. He opened the kit and pulled out a roll of duct tape and some gauze. There was also a small multi-tool, sharp and versatile. His mind raced through possibilities. If he could chip away at the edges of the boulder, weaken its grip, maybe he could create enough space to slip his leg free. It was a long shot, but it was a shot. Hours passed. Sweat poured down his face, mingling with dust and tears. The knife scraped against the rock, sparks flying as he worked feverishly. His fingers bled from the effort, muscles screamed in protest, but Eli refused to stop. Pain twisted through his leg with every movement, sharp and searing, but he forced himself to breathe through it. With each chip and scrape, hope grew. The sun climbed higher, turning the canyon into an oven. Eli's water was nearly gone, but adrenaline and desperation kept him moving. His hands shook so badly that the knife slipped twice, cutting shallow lines into his palms. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the boulder shifted. Just a fraction, a breath of movement. He pushed harder, gritting his teeth. And then, space. A narrow, agonizing gap appeared between the stone and the canyon floor. Eli's heart hammered. Slowly, painstakingly, he slid his leg into the opening. The bone-crushing pressure lessened, and he felt a rush of cold air against raw, bruised skin. Freedom, partial but real. He wriggled his leg free, collapsing onto the dusty ground with a groan. The pain hit like a tidal wave, sharp and brutal, but he didn't care. He was free. His leg throbbed fiercely, swollen and useless, but he had to move. Rest wasn't an option. Using the jagged rocks as leverage, Eli began the slow, torturous crawl upward. Each movement sent bolts of agony through his body. His hands scraped raw, his knees bruised, but he kept pushing. Memories of Lana's voice echoed in his mind, her laughter, her worry, the last message she'd sent before he vanished into the desert. "You're stubborn, Eli. Don't ever stop fighting." He fought now, not just against the canyon, but against the creeping shadows inside himself. Hours blurred as he crawled. The canyon walls seemed to close in, the sun beating down relentlessly. Sweat and dust caked his skin, and every breath was a struggle. But then something changed. A faint breeze brushed his cheek, a promise of air beyond the stones, a whisper of the world outside. With renewed effort, Eli pushed toward the sound. The canyon narrowed, forcing him into a tight squeeze. His body protested, every muscle screaming, but he didn't stop. Then, just when he thought his strength would fail him, he saw it. The rim of the canyon, a jagged line of sky. Freedom was close. With one last terrible effort, Eli hauled himself upward, pulling on rough edges, digging fingers into every crevice. And then, he broke through. The world exploded around him, sunlight, wind, space. He collapsed onto the hot rock, gasping for air, tears burning his eyes. He was alive. Eli lay there for long minutes, soaking in the sky, the wind, the taste of freedom. He was battered, broken, but unbowed. His leg was shattered, his body barely holding together, but he had escaped the canyon's grasp. With the last of his strength, he reached for his flare gun. His hands trembled, but he raised it to the sky and fired. The flare blossomed, a bright, desperate beacon cutting through the blue. Far below, a faint rumble answered, the distant sound of a search party. Hope surged inside him. Eli Voss was a survivor. And today, he had won. Part 8. The Climb. The flare's red blaze faded into the sky, leaving Eli staring up at the vast canyon wall. The sheer rock face stretched above him, an unforgiving monument of stone that promised only pain and uncertainty. But there was no other choice. The flat canyon floor was a trap. The rim was his only hope. His leg throbbed with every heartbeat, the fracture sharp and unforgiving, but the fire in his chest burned hotter. He forced himself to rise, testing his weight on the broken limb. A scream of pain tore from his throat, raw and guttural, but he held on. The climb would be brutal, every inch a battle. Using jagged edges and crevices like brittle handholds, Eli began. His hands, battered and bloody from the days below, clenched the rock as he hoisted himself up. The wall seemed to mock him, its towering face blotting out the sun and narrowing his world to a patch of dusty stone. Time lost meaning. Minutes bled into hours as he pulled, pushed, and scrambled, muscles trembling from exhaustion. The air thinned with altitude and effort, but Eli didn't stop. Not now. At one point he nearly slipped, his good hand grazing loose gravel that tumbled down the cliff face. Heart pounding, breath ragged, he caught himself on a thin crack, his fingers digging desperately into the cool stone. "Come on," he hissed, voice ragged. "Not like this." He found a tiny ledge and collapsed briefly, the world spinning around him. Sweat mixed with dust as he wiped his brow, forcing his eyes upward. The canyon rim was still far, too far, but closer than before. The wind picked up, a sudden gust that chilled his sweat-soaked skin. Below, the canyon floor looked impossibly distant, a twisted maze of shadows and stone. The thought of going back was unbearable. Eli gritted his teeth and moved again. Each movement was agony. His leg, barely functional, dragged uselessly, forcing him to rely mostly on his arms and the strength of his core. His fingers trembled, raw and bleeding. His breaths came in shallow gasps, lungs burning. But he climbed. He thought of Lana, of the stories he had yet to write, the sunsets he hadn't seen, the cold water he would drink once free. His mind became a lifeline, tethering him to a future beyond the canyon walls. Hours later, with trembling limbs and a shattered body, Eli finally reached the canyon rim. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the desert. With trembling hands, he hauled himself over the edge and collapsed onto the warm earth. He was free, and this time, nothing would hold him down. Part 9. Rescue. Eli lay on the canyon rim, chest heaving, every muscle screaming in protest. The desert wind whispered softly through the sagebrush, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. For a moment he closed his eyes, letting the silence wash over him, the silence of survival. Then a faint sound, the low hum of rotors slicing the air. His heart jumped. Hope surged through his veins, electric and sudden. "Help!" he rasped, voice hoarse and cracked. He waved his arms weakly, the flare gun long spent, but his will unbroken. From above, a helicopter dipped low, a bright orange rescue team visible inside. The pilot skillfully hovered near the rim, a rope ladder swinging in the desert breeze. "Hold on! We see you," came a voice through a megaphone. Eli forced himself to sit upright, limbs trembling. He felt tears burning his eyes, tears of relief, exhaustion, and something deeper, the fragile, unyielding will to live. The rescuers secured him into a harness, their voices calm and reassuring despite the urgency. As they lifted him from the canyon rim, the vast expanse of the desert stretched below, beautiful, indifferent, but now a place of survival and triumph. In the medical tent later, warm blankets wrapped around him, the steady beep of monitors filling the quiet room, Eli let himself finally rest. Lana was there, her face etched with worry and relief, tears silently slipping down her cheeks as she clasped his hand. "You're going to be okay," she whispered, and he believed her. 5 days trapped in a canyon, fighting pain, fear, and the very limits of human endurance. But Eli Voss had escaped, not just the canyon, but the darkness within. And as he closed his eyes, the desert sun setting beyond the horizon, he knew one truth. He was still alive. And that was everything. Part Text. Aftermath and legacy. Weeks had passed since Eli's rescue, but the canyon's shadow still clung to him. The physical wounds were healing, slowly but steadily, but deeper scars lingered, etched into his mind and spirit. Lying in the hospital bed, watching the sterile walls blur beneath the steady rhythm of machines, Eli felt the weight of everything he'd endured. The pain, the loneliness, the relentless battle against his own despair, all woven into a tapestry of survival that no one else could fully understand. Lana visited every day, bringing stories from the outside world, fragments of normal life Eli had left behind. She talked about friends who never stopped hoping, reporters who were now curious, and the small community that had rallied around his family. "I heard they're naming the slot canyon Voss's Echo," Lana said one afternoon, smiling softly. "A reminder of what you survived, and what you uncovered." Eli's thoughts drifted back to those ancient petroglyphs, the strange echoes that had first drawn him in. The canyon had kept its secrets for centuries, but now it held one more story. His story. Determined to honor the experience, Eli began writing again. Not just the journal entries from before the fall, but a full account of those 5 days, the despair, the madness, the grit, and the ultimate resolve to live. His story became more than survival. It became a testament to human will, the fragile beauty of life, and the unforgiving power of nature. Months later, standing on the canyon's edge once more, this time with a team, cameras, and scientists, Eli felt a quiet peace. He was no longer alone. The desert had changed him, shaped him in ways he was only beginning to understand. And through his story, he hoped to inspire others to face their own dark places and find the strength to climb out. Because sometimes the greatest adventures aren't about discovery or glory, they're about the journey within. And Eli Voss's journey was far from over.